of that investigation report. So I think before I start, I think I would like to say that that tower blocks and the tragedy in London clearly was a game changer in taking seriously fire safety and also making sure that residents are safe living in high-rise and high-risk buildings. And quite rightly so, has put a focus on the safety, particularly for residents in blocks. Sheffield does have a strong track record of investing in its social housing and particularly on fire safety to make sure that our buildings are safe, they are well managed, they are well maintained, and also that residents can be assured that they are able to live safely in their homes. But despite that, we found as a result of following the tragedy and the government's new testing arrangement that we had a tower block that failed the government's new test on safety. As a council, there is nothing more important than people's safety and people feeling safe. So at that time, we took a decision very, very quickly to remove the cladding and its insulation and work closely with residents throughout to make sure as well that we're working with them. And we also replaced that cladding material very, very swiftly. But quite naturally, residents at Hanover and also in our other tower blocks that we have in the city raised questions, and particularly for the Hanover residents, we agreed and alongside with council elected members to do a factual account of how that building came to be with a cladding that later was found not to be suitable. So I hope you've had the opportunity to look in detail at the reports. I'm here today, obviously, leading obviously the conversation this evening, but I've also brought along with me Jill Hurst, who led on the investigation, and also David Ollis, who's been instrumental, obviously, in providing advice throughout and also seeking those external opinions to make sure that our assumptions that we were making were correct, and also that following the review of the documentation, that we were actually representing that factually in the report. So between the three of us this evening, along with Paul, what we would like to do is answer any questions that you may have about the reports and also the findings and how we respond going forward. So really, it's open to yourselves to the questions that you would like us to answer this evening. And also we have committed to ongoing engagement with our residents living in Hanover in terms of responding to any issues that they may have.
Hi, thanks, Janet. So if members do have questions, I just ask if you use the chat function just to say that you've got a question. You don't have to say what it is, just that you've got one, and I'll just go through them in the order that they appear. So if you want to ask a question, if you do that, it just helps me to manage the many faces on the screen. But we've got John Cawthorne from Hanover Tara with us, and I'll give him the opportunity to speak for a couple of minutes just to give us a tenant perspective on, or leaseholder perspective, a tenant or leaseholder perspective on the matter. before we move into questions. So John, if you like, pass over to you for a few minutes. If you'd like to unmute yourself, John. Yeah.
Andy, help me unmute myself here. Yeah.
Oh, you're unmuted now, John. We can hear you.
Can we hear me now?
We can hear you great. Yeah.
Okay. We've had 3 years plus of real stress, heartache, worry, fear. Tenants have voted with their feet and gone. Tenants have up sticks and moved from a home that they loved into the private sector because they were fearful. I've seen tenants who will not recover from what they've been through. I cannot underestimate how frightening it was for many people. It was a life-changing episode. And the problem for me is an ongoing, deep-seated anger at the totally and utterly inadequate actions of the authority as landlord. Totally and utterly incompetent landlord. Because a competent landlord surely would not have permitted certain things to have occur. I'll give you a perfect example. We were given panels as examples of what was to be applied to the outside. And for 8 years, I kept these items. And these items are solid aluminium sheet. And that's not what appeared on the building. And we were told that the council didn't know. And yet the evidence set before us is that the council did know. Some of the officers may not have known, but that was a failure of communication. It was a lack of attention to detail. It was poor record keeping. This is the actions of an errant teenager failing to do their O-level homework, not of a major landlord in the nation. One of the largest landlords in the country acting like a petulant teenager. It is shameful. You should all be utterly ashamed of what happened here. And you should be ashamed that you allowed a contractor to handle this entire process, this design and build nonsense. And you've got officers at the sharp end who just didn't ask the right questions, just assumed that everything was okay. And yet we had tenants at the time saying, well, isn't this material around the windows a bad idea? It's PVC. At that point, I was talking to a clerk of works and the contracts manager from Lovell in my home, pointing to a big gap in my window that was supposedly finished and indicating the PVC. And he banned me from site from that time forward. I made a complaint to management, who sided with the contractor against the Tenants Association, against me as a tenant. They even wrote to me saying if I was aggressive with the contracts manager, who was a vile and obnoxious bully, if I was angry with him, I put my tenancy at risk. I add that I am now a leaseholder. I don't believe in right to buy. I bought my property to protect myself. That is shameful that you sided with a vile, obnoxious, bullying contracts manager against a tenant who had a long-standing relationship as a tenant's representative with you, who was known to be a person who only spoke the truth, and you sided with a contracts manager against me and others. Shameful. Shame on you. Now, at the time it was installed, we told you as a body that the material that you had installed on the single stairwell in this building was not fire retardant, and when it was mounted on a wooden frame, it was totally and utterly inadequate to purpose. You fobbed us off. Since that time, you have had to replace that material because it was deemed a fire risk. You were told 8 years previously by me and others in writing that that was the case. That was denied. And when I said I have that material on a cloud, the story changed. Oh, okay. That's wrong. As we speak, we're talking about doing some extra work. This digresses slightly, but it's important as an example. As we speak, today I had a meeting discussing the extra work that's going to be put into this building because it's a single stairwell escape. The proposals that were brought to us for the first meeting were already well advanced. So we could, that restricts our ability as tenants to have any input, or as a tenants association. It was well advanced. There was discussion about placing a large 16 bin room next to a children's playground in a pedestrian area and opening that up to a bin wagon and wagons emptying recycling, which we said we didn't feel was appropriate. As we were sat in that Zoom meeting, there was a machine outside digging holes for test pits in grass that's only been reinstated for a matter of months, and the fence around it was only removed 1 week ago. 1 week ago, this fence was removed after 2 years of being fenced in like a prison. The mud bath had just been reinstated by a very good local company, not like last time when the contractors made a right dog's breakfast of it. While we were speaking, they were digging holes outside for test pits to build this bin room that I've said over my dead body. Now, I've been informed since that there's going to be a change of plan. What about the 2 big holes dug outside in the grass that's only a week ago had the fence removed? The children and families were overjoyed. I'm not joking, overjoyed to see the back of this fence and this mud bath. And what do we get? 1 week later, 2 damn great holes dug. Shameful. Shame on you all. What annoys me even more, I'm afraid. Let me finish. What annoys me even more, I'm afraid.
I'll give you another minute, Mr. Cawthorne.
Is that if I had sharp middle-class elbows and this was about trees, it might be a bit different. But we, the poor working class, it's a bit different. It's not right. Here endeth the first lesson.
Okay, thank you for your impassioned contribution, Mr. Cawthorne. I think it was important for us to hear a leaseholder resident point of view on the matter. There's a few things sort of raised in that, Janet, that you might want to come on back on before we move to questions. So things like concerns that were raised at the time that, as Mr. Cawthorne said, felt it weren't listened to, that type of thing. Do you want to just address that before we move to the councillors' questions?
Yes, certainly. And John and I have had obviously a number of conversations, and certainly I think in terms of the way consultation originally took place as part of the scheme, but also what we did do is try to make sure that we were working closely with residents once we knew that there were an issue, to quickly resolve the issues, which was also to remove both the cladding and the insulation, and also later, once residents and Jill Hurst, who's here tonight, identified that there was an issue with some of materials on the internal staircase area of there, an action that was taken to resolve those issues. And I'm sure that Jill will be able to provide a little bit more detail on that. I absolutely, understand, obviously, tenants and leaseholders' concern. This is their home, and we have an absolute duty to make sure that they feel safe, they are safe, and if there are issues, that we resolve those issues. And I think there's obviously some learning from this scheme in terms of, how we might learn and do things differently moving forward. I do think that it might be worth just going through how we carried out the review of what happened, and also, you know, the way Jill and the investigation officers looked at the information, and, you know, that gathering of information, that reviewing of that information to arrive at what took place at Hanover. And I think that'll be probably a place to start this evening. And also then we can talk about, it wasn't included in the report that you find myself, but what action we took for the internal material that needed to be removed and replaced. You know, we're happy to update Scrutiny on that basis. So Jill, would you like to just go through you know, the process for the investigation and what we looked at and some of those findings? Thank you.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Okay. So I think that the process really got 3 strands to it. So there was collecting all the written documentation around how the project had been managed, who'd been involved. So there was the written documentation, and that covered everything from what did the housing service have on its files, what did our colleagues in the capital delivery service who were commissioned to undertake the design to undertake the sort of specification and input into the design stage, what did they hold? What did our planning colleagues hold? What did our building control team in the council? On this occasion, it was the council's building control team that signed off the scheme. Sometimes it can be a private building control officer, but it was the council. So we went initially to look at all the documents that were available to us. That was quite a lengthy process and had to be gone over a couple of times because we realised that there were gaps in the information. There wasn't that full end-to-end historical record. There were references to meetings that supposedly took place, but we didn't have a record of that meeting. And so we went round the loop a few times to actually gather that information. We subsequently then identified that maybe that information might be held by the contractor Lovell, and Janet and myself actually went to meet with Lovell to go through what we were looking for, and it is unfortunate, but eventually we had to use a sort of the formal process of a legal request for the information that we were missing, and that's certainly where David and his team certainly helped us to try and ensure that every avenue was explored to get all the information, to try and get to the bottom, because we knew initially when the first sort of report was being drafted that we got too many gaps in it to draw any key conclusions. And we didn't want to assume things. It's too easy sometimes to make assumptions about what you think happened when you're managing a project. We wanted the facts of the information. The other key bit of the process was then to identify who had worked on this project, who was still working for the city council, and had some direct involvement in the project. And unfortunately, we found that a number of people who were quite key players no longer worked for the city council. I think I've responded previously to some other questions. In fact, one of the key officers in the capital delivery service had actually was no longer with us. So we tried to explore speaking to everybody who might have had some insight, who could have filled in the gaps or signposted as to what had happened. So it did include talking to the people that are still around in capital delivery service, talking to the building control team. A number of them had already left as well, but we talked to the manager who's now around. how would this have worked? What information do you hold? We also spoke to Alumet, and as I said, we also spoke to Lovell to obtain information. So we looked at what electronic information was still available that might have been on systems. And so through a combination of interviews and documents, we pieced together a picture of, well, the factual content of what we knew happened, but what we tried to do in publishing all the information on the on a link to on the website is be really as transparent as we possibly can be and say, this is all the information that we have looked at, and obviously these are the key things that we've drawn. So we've got, it's a relatively short report. There's over 150 documents that are published, but we pieced together tried to answer the sort of questions that Paul had asked us to respond to, which are similar to the questions that were asked by council back in 2015. Sort of what happened here, how did it happen? So the report will goes through section by section the conclusions that we've drawn under some themes. So what did the building control information tell us? What did the planning information tell us? What did the information we got from the Capital Delivery Service tell us? And what did the information that maybe was around from the housing service? So that is how we've approached the investigation, through talking to people and gathering information. And we acknowledge in the report that there are still some gaps. We can't be absolutely conclusive on to answer yes and no on everything, or who did what. There are still, and I think we accept that this is a weakness that I think John's picked up on, the information isn't as complete as it really should be. And what we don't want to do is draw assumptions from that, but just say, this is what we found, this is what we found out, and we've published the information that supports those conclusions. Do you want me to go on and just talk about the staircase?
Yes, if you could.
I think that'd be helpful. Yeah.
So although it's not in the investigation report, because the issue around the what's called trespa, the material that's on the stairs, came about after we'd already removed the cladding and we were working towards the design work on what would go back. And it was a resident on there who drew to our attention that the material was perhaps there were some question marks about it. Now, I wasn't aware that there'd been the historic concerns, personally wasn't aware, but then I arranged for a panel to be removed for us to check where that panel had come from, and we went right back to the contractor's original supply chain. We did have on file a record of where they got that material from, and at that point it was confirmed that the material, although it's called trespa, was not the fire retardant product that the council had specified Lovell to install on those stairs. So we then arranged to talk to Lovell about it, put in front of them the information that we'd obtained, and they immediately accepted responsibility for that material. And now we have replaced it on a different framework, a metal framework with metal panels. So that issue has been addressed by us, and Lovell have compensated the council.
Can I just come back now,
Yes.
Ben, before we go into questions?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, what's come out from what Janet and Jill have both said numerous times is the missing information. And one of the questions I've asked consistently on that is, why is it missing? Where's it missing from? What department's it missing from? And what's come back, of course, is there isn't a single source of that, because part of it is if we go back originally with this, when this was first commissioned, it was, I understand, under Sheffield Homes. It wasn't directly under the council officers. And when the Sheffield Homes was transferred into the council and closed down, I understand a lot of paperwork was missing from that period. I was told there was additional paperwork that was missing because of a fault with the Capita computer system. Then there's other paperwork missing from Lovells. So there isn't a single source that you can actually point where what went missing where with this. And I find that really, really disappointing. It's something that I feel a responsibility to apologise for on behalf of all of us who've been elected members in this, because remember, this started off under Councillor Scriven and it continued under the Labour group, this project. And I think we all are very sincerely sorry that this situation has happened. It shouldn't happen. And I think the biggest lesson I've learned from this is we need secure systems for storing information for the future, so that we never have a situation where we can't pinpoint why a decision was made, irrelevant of which party or person, and we can't look back and look into that. And this is just a catalogue of poor record keeping across 10 years, really, it is. And I say, I don't think there's a single point or a single person you can blame for that. But it certainly means that it's something that we as a council need to address and make sure every decision we make on major project work, we have fully recorded, that we can, if any time in the future we need to get back and look at those decisions, we can pinpoint who, where and when that decision was made. So I apologise to everyone at Hanover and all the residents on behalf of collectively 10 years of different people being involved with this. But I hope that explains something why we don't have a full record. I understand there's a piece going out from some politicians at the moment that we and officers are hiding people's names so that no, this can't be pinpointed to anyone. And that's been going out in leaflets around the area. I have to say that is just playing Donald Trump politics. If I had a name that I could pinpoint any decision that anyone wanted to know, it would be revealed. And it's a very dangerous thing to go down that path. And if there is any proof that any politician or any elected member has, or any way they want us to investigate anything that they could give us proof that either an officer or an elected member is withholding names on this, then I hope they'll have the decency to come forward and speak to me about it, so we can take that forward and not use like the media to make allegations that have no foundation whatsoever. I feel it's important to say that, Chair, because to me, knowing where these things originated is very important. And I believe that our officers have looked at every possibility to get every piece of information we could with this report, knowing full well that if they didn't do that, it would come out anyway eventually and cause serious repercussions. But the fact it wasn't kept, John, is something, and I've done this personally to you as well, is something I can only apologise over many years of this going on. For really the last 11 years we're talking, aren't we, really? From when the project started to when it finished, there should be a paper trail of every decision on a major capital item that a council takes a decision on. The fact there isn't is not acceptable, and we need to ensure that that is firmly built into our procedures for the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Woodland. Appreciate the sort of honest, heartfelt sort of nature of that response and the apology for what's happened with the missing information. Just to reiterate what Councillor had said, if there are allegations about inappropriate behaviour by either councillors or council officers, there are official processes that should go through, whether that be the standards board, etc. And if there is something, let's get it into the proper track and the proper process and get it dealt with in an appropriate way, because that sort of behaviour would in effect tar all of us. One councillor does wrong, the world thinks of all councillors. One council officer does wrong, the whole council's dreadful in someone's view. So if there is any evidence of allegations, let's get it into a proper process and get that dealt with. If we can move into questions, and the first one I've got is Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my initial question has been answered actually, Chair, by officers. It was, did we get to the bottom of the reasons why the contractors used a very different type of cladding on that block than they did on all of the other blocks in the city? And I think that's been partly answered. But can I just take the opportunity to echo what yourself and Paul have also said about to Mr. Corshaw, and to thank him. I certainly have learned a lot of lessons as a local councillor from this episode, and you know, if it weren't for people like himself batting for local residents and, you know, holding his self in the manner in which he does, this could have really turned out far worse than what it is. And for me as well, Mr. Corshaw, I think there is partly a good story to this in terms of the speed in which the cabinet member and the team at the time responded to the initial findings of the report on the cladding and how quickly it was removed. You know, it's quite sad, I think, that we see you here today saying the things that you had. And again, I just feel very sad and sorry about that. But thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Janet, Paul, would you like to respond to Councillor Murphy's comments?
Yes, I think so. Yes, thank you, Councillor Murphy. I think we do obviously, you know, want to apologise obviously to residents and have done so. You know, residents shouldn't be put through the situation where, you know, a material has been placed on a block that later has to be removed, causing all that anxiety and confusion, and also whilst we replace that material. I do think, you know, Sheffield wasn't unique in using this type of material. This material was widely used in the country, and that probably is you know, as set out in the report, is some confusion around the regulations at that time and what was deemed to be suitable material, not just looking at the external cladding material, but also the insulation and the system. But important lessons have been learnt, and there is more robust testing and checking of any materials that now go into any home in the country. And I think Sheffield obviously didn't take no chances. We removed the material. You know, at that time in June 2017, it wasn't 100% like clear around the materials and the system, but we took the decision to remove that material, to remove all of the risk away from residents and work with residents to replace that cladding. And, you know, John is correct, you know, that whole process, you know, took a couple of years. It was really, really hard for this community to be, you know, living through that and all that inconvenience. And what we're trying to do now is now we've replaced the cladding, but also looking at the additional fire safety measures that we're putting in place. We're improving the communal areas, replacing the doors, we're getting the sprinklers in, and as John says, the environmental areas around the block as well. And then hopefully what we can do is leave residents, you know, that they feel satisfied that not only have we removed the risk, but we've put in additional measures that will ensure that they can and are safe, and also wider improvements to that block.
Thank you, Janet.
Can I just add to that as well, yeah, please? In addition to what we're doing at Hanover, we're also prioritising not just Hanover, but all our tower blocks, a reassessment of how the repair service deals with issues in these blocks. I think with the Hanover block, we had a meeting with Councillor Kaltoum and Councillor Angela this week, and one of the things that we're doing with these blocks is we're going through floor by floor and checking that we sort every issue out in these blocks and we make them absolutely 100% safe, secure, make sure everything is done. And there's going to be a regular inspection on a quarterly period of all the blocks in the future through the repair service, which hasn't been naturally built into the programme in the past. So we are doing that. And the second point is really when Anne was talking about why it was different on Hanover, one of the things that I was told why it was different is because of the contours of the building. The cladding that we put on the other blocks wouldn't adapt to fit on the building because of the angulation of some of the points on the Hanover block. And that was one of the reasons I was told that it was done differently. But I do have to reinforce again, I don't believe there's an elected member or cabinet member who's ever been involved from any party in this city that would ever do anything that would put anyone's life at risk because of money. And I firmly believe that there isn't a single elected member would have signed a contract or agreed to a change of a contract that would put money ahead of the safety of our residents. So I don't believe that there was any maliciousness from any elected member in any of this operation at all from the day one right the way through. Thank you.
Chair, if I might just follow up on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I think Councillor Wood has sort of started to cover some of the points that I was going to make, in that I think Councillor Murphy's question, it was actually the first question in the report, was why was it different to the other blocks? And although we couldn't find the actual contemporaneous record of the decision as to when it was chosen, which is likely to have been a bit of an iterative process, what we did find was some later emails which referred to the fact that it was retained for this was selected for the purpose that Councillor Wood said, because it was easier or was capable of going to the profile of the building. And also what we know is that the earlier planning documentation required the profile to be retained. So although we don't have the actual contemporaneous decision making at the time it was chosen, I think we've got good evidence to suggest that that's why this material was chosen.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rivers, do you want to come in and ask your question?
Yes, thanks, Chair. First of all, I think a lot of things have been said about Hanover Tower and the cladding and the issue that took place. But the fact of the matter is today, as we sit here, we only have John as one of the residents, but somebody who has been working with every single family and every single person. So I think myself and Jonathan and Jill and Councillor Wood have had so many meetings after the report came out. But what would have been really great was when the cladding was being removed, there should have been these kind of meetings happening now, should have been the ones that councillors before me, Councillor Cook, and cabinets before you, Councillor Wood, have been all asking similar questions. And I think today we would have had, if actions weren't taken to remove it, yes, we all recognize that today we'd be having completely different conversation. If the incident and the accident that happened in Grenfell, God forbid, happened in Hanover Tower, we wouldn't be talking like this. We'd be talking about the loss of Sheffield residents and families. So yes, credit goes to the fact that it was removed. There's no one saying that, you know, it was removed, and there's a credit that goes to that and how quickly it was removed. However, we all have to sit here and think about it. It took 3 years for residents not to know what's going on, while a report that's in front of us today is put together. The other thing is, I would like to say to Councillor Wood, I have been, from the day that I've been elected until now, I've been supporting every single family in that building. And so you have to understand the closeness that actually people built, and even councillors before me. One thing that we need to go away with today is we all said lessons have been learned. And we also have to be grateful that we have not lost the good people of Sheffield who live in that building. Now, instead of actually, this is not a political differences as well, I'd like to remind Councillor Wood, because Jim Stanky was also asking similar questions. So let's not actually take the party seat. Let's talk about the reality of the children who go to the schools around me, who could have actually lost their parents or themselves. So today, these officers are working and trying to meet some of the demands that we put on behalf of the residents of the tower. And I will say thank you for actually having all the meetings that you're having with us, Janet and Jill. So there's no conflict here to say that they're not working. I don't really know what your message was, Councillor Wood, but it only brings divisions if we keep on pointing the finger at each other just because we're different parties. So let's not actually talk like that. Let's talk about the elderly woman who doesn't speak any English and still talks to John, however she communicates, and talks about the cladding that she never understood what it would have done to her life. So we know what happened. What really would be important for this beautiful city of Sheffield is we don't have the history that Kensington and Chelsea has, because they lost people. But what do we learn from this? How do we scrutinize contracts? How do we make sure that the quality of people that we're giving jobs to, taxpayers' money, and the lives of our residents, how do we make sure that this never ever happens again?
Okay. Can I come back, Chair?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I hope I was trying to make it a very non-party political presentation, really, on my behalf, because I don't see it, and I respect the working relationship I have with yourself and Angela, which I found to be courteous and helpful and that. But I was referring to a specific leaflet that was distributed in the central area claiming that we had covered up the names of people who knew things in the report, which was put out by your party, not necessarily you. And I'll be happy to send you a copy of that leaflet, which has been sent to me, and perhaps you would take it up with them and make sure this sort of thing doesn't happen again. The second point I have to raise is a second apology, really, because I remember going to council upon council meeting, having spoken to officers and different people and legal people, and being promised this report would be ready for the following month. And that went on month by month by month. One thing of a lesson I would say is, if we ever set up to do a report like this again, Chair, I think there should be a time limit to when it has to be published by, because I think this has gone on far too long. 3 years is not acceptable. I wasn't happy with that at all. But I do think any future reports should be time limited, and they should be made to be available within that time period, or what is found by the end of that period has to be brought forward. I think I accept entirely this has gone on far too long. It should have been out 12 months ago. So that's the second apology really that I'll make on that. Thank you, Chair.
John's got his hand up.
Janet or Jill, do you want to come in on add anything to that, or?
I think I absolutely agree. The report took longer than it should do. I think once we got in the middle of the investigation and looking at the documentation, it became clear that we did also need, you know, an expert's opinion on some of those areas, and particularly around the form of contract, and also around specification and regulations at that time. So that did add a delay to the producing of the report. We have tried to communicate and meet with residents over the last 3 years, and you know, and equally so has with the fire service as well. You know, but clearly there is probably more that we could have done. You know, to let everyone know that, you know, the delays was for specific reasons, and I think there are some lessons in that that we will like take away. You know, but I think, you know, overall we are very fortunate that there have been fires in Hanover, and none of those fires have led to the spread of that fire in the building, and also that you know, we have tried our best to make sure that people are safe, and that is something that was our priority, and to make sure that people are safe while we replace that light cladding. There has been a project group as well running in terms of working closely with the Tara and some residents, you know, on that replacement of that cladding. And that's gone really well in terms of working together in the community to be able to put right the new cladding, and also you know, the new improvements that I think will make a difference to residents at that block.
Thank you. So yeah, Councillor Rivers, you sort of sent me a message saying you might want to ask a follow-up. I just please ask that it's not about this leaflet, because I think you and Councillor Wood have both said your bit, and I think we can be above that.
There's more important thing that we have on the table today than us saying things to each other, really.
Yeah, that's fine then. Yeah, go ahead.
And I think Councillor Wood knows that. What I was coming back for was when we asked question after question when the report was coming. Fair enough, actually, Councillor Wood was also asking the same thing and making sure that we know. The other thing is what you didn't say about the report, and I should say this, is that it's been translated to 2 languages, where people actually were able to read it although the other report was very technical and very I couldn't even read that. It was difficult to read that one, but this one has been translated with the advice from the Tara and ourselves.
Okay, I'll take that as a comment. I mean, Janet, Paul, do you want to say anything, or you?
I do appreciate the work that Khartoum has actually helped with doing that. Yes, and she's quite right. They did help with getting that done, and we appreciate that. I think generally we all have tried to work very much together to get to the bottom of the problems and deal with this. I don't believe it's been a party issue at all. I felt very comfortable dealing with Khartoum and Angela with this, and I value the input they've given back to me as the local councillors.
Okay, Councillor Baker, you want to ask your question?
Chair, it's more of comment, if that's all right.
Comment? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Nice to see John still there and fighting the good fight. He's been fighting it for so many years for that Tara. It's amazing you've still got the energy to hang in there, and I'd like to say thank you, John. You're amazing. As someone who was involved right at the beginning before it really took off, and saw the reasons why it was necessary to do the cladding. There were, particularly in the masonettes, that were also cladded, if you remember, but slightly differently. There were actually holes in the walls. So it was a necessary exercise. Really concerned about a number of things there. The fact that there's information that's still missing, and we don't really have any chance of getting that missing information now. That shouldn't happen. The fact that I'm not sure if any action has been taken by the almost misrepresentation of trespass as a building material. That is rather concerning. And to say, yes, Hanover block is unique. We've only got 3 other blocks who've got single story staircases in them. All the others have 2, and the other 3 are in my own ward, and they're brick cladded. So Hanover Tower block is definitely unique. So it would definitely be treated slightly differently to the other blocks in the city. Going forward, I think officers and members made the right decisions when these problems came to light. Really sad that it took so long to go through the mechanisms of having it replaced. Part of that was to make sure, I believe, that the material that went up in its place didn't cause us any further, but more important, the tenants, any more further problems. And obviously, you need to consult with tenants, and it takes time to consult, but it did take a flipping long time, didn't it? But gladly that's over and done with now, and I know that you're firming up all the fire regulations and all the single tower blocks in there. But to say to Mr. Cawthorne and the other tenants there that there's not a member of this council who won't do anything they can to make sure that something like this will never happen again. And I thank you again for being here today. Thank you, Chair.
Janet, Councillor Wood, do you want to just say anything in response to the comments?
No,
Yes, and yeah, and just to reiterate, yeah, that Councillor Baker is correct. What we wanted to make sure, and given, you know, we were working through, you know, new guidance with regarding high-rise buildings, is we involved the government officials at every stage. We got third-party accreditation ourselves, our fire service, to make sure that what we were putting on, because obviously cladding is installed, that, you know, shouldn't be moved for about 30 years really, you know, so we wanted to make sure what we were putting back in place was a better product, and also would actually make sure that it would do the job and would be safe.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Sanger, do you want to ask your questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And you know, clearly, well, first of all, let's thank Mr. Cawthorne and the tenants for Mr. Cawthorne for coming to this meeting and putting his views, the views of tenants, so strongly. It's really important that we hear them. I mean, I think when Grenfell happened, you know, it was a truly awful tragedy, and we're not through it yet in terms of learning all the lessons. I mean, I'm just a little concerned really about 2 or 3 things from this report. I mean, firstly, I speak as someone who's been a councillor a long time, and we've gone through a lot of systems, and we've done a lot of technology changes in the years I've been a councillor. And it is often the case that 5 or 10 or 15 years after something happens, there are very few records. And it is something that's always bugged me as somebody interested in keeping records and archives, it's something that always shocks me. I mean, that's more of a comment than, because I don't think there's an easy way around it. And you know, I respect the answers that the officers have given, but it's something that does keep happening. And second thing is, I do think the council did a good job in terms of removing this faulty cladding. I mean, I think the cabinet member at the time, Councillor Dunn, did absolutely the right thing about going to see the tenants and going around all the blocks very quickly and getting this faulty cladding removed. So I think that was a good thing the council did. I think the next thing is, as Janet Sharp has just said, it did take a long time to put the new material up, and the process taking a long time. I would still really ask two questions. One, what I still don't understand why this report that full council asked for has taken so long. And I do think in future, we need to be clearer at full council. I know when I've moved motions and I've argued in group about need to put a timetable and clear that with the chief executive at the time, because things always take longer in local government than you would believe. But you know, it shouldn't have taken 3 years to get to this scrutiny committee, and I don't think that's the fault of the scrutiny chair. I think that's the process of this council hasn't been quick enough, and it's disappointing that there's still gaps. I think my final question is more looking forward. This is about learning lessons for our tenants and leaseholders, but most of the people who live in high-rise blocks are in the private sector. I think it's, you know, across the country, it's not just about the social housing at height. It's got to be about all high-rise buildings, because, you know, quite clearly the development plan for Sheffield is about continuing to build upwards in the city centre, and so making sure that people live safely at height, whether they're tenants or whether they're leaseholders, whether they're social housing, whether they're private housing, or whether it's people in hotels, they all need to be safe and feel safe. So what I don't get from this report is, have we learned all the lessons, both from the Hanover experience, but also all the lessons from Grenfell?
Shall I come back, Ben?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah. Evening, Andy. I agree with a lot of what you've said, obviously, and as you'll be aware from our meeting yesterday at the Community Safety Partnership, I put onto the agenda the remaining 6 blocks that have defective cladding in the city. Now, these are private blocks, and we're constantly badgering the government to get something done with that. What we have done, and again, I reiterated this yesterday, we get South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue to go into those other blocks on a regular basis and give us a fire risk assessment. As long as that fire risk assessment comes back from South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue that it's safe to inhabit them, that's the position we take with it. If we ever get a report back that it's unsafe, as we had with a particular block some 9 months ago, we will immediately put a closure order on that block. So that is the position. We're badgering government for funding. We're speaking to the owners of these blocks, and we're ensuring that we get safety checks, which I ask for on a monthly basis from South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue for a report on each of those blocks. So that's where we are with the remaining blocks. And that's it, really. Thanks.
Chair, can I?
Yeah.
Well, I welcome what Councillor Wood has said, and clearly I would like sort of Janet Sharp to answer the other bits of the questions. But just to follow up on that, clearly what we heard yesterday was 5 out of the 6 blocks which still have the wrong sort of cladding are working with South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue. There was still 1 block which isn't. I accept Councillor Wood's guarantee that every month he will chase that, but the residents in that block need to know that we are all doing as much as we can, and that's clearly there must be more we can do, more that we as a council and we as a South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Authority can do to make sure that all 6 of those tower blocks are properly inspected.
I'll let Janet answer that. From what I understand, that 6 blocks still has fire and safety inspections, but they're not cooperating with us in trying to get a resolution to dealing with the cladding. But can you just confirm if that's the position, Janet?
Right. So what we have been doing and what we continue to do, we share powers with South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service in terms of private sector housing regulation. And obviously, the fire service obviously have lead responsibility in terms of fire regulations. But it does cut across us in terms of how we use our collective powers to ensure that those living in private sector blocks obviously are as safe as people obviously living in social housing. So we regularly inspect and and make sure that those blocks, the fire service make sure that those blocks have fire risk assessments in place. They have risk mitigation plans in place, so that makes in the short term those safe. And the council has been very, very clear that we wish that any block where it is a serious hazard, that material is removed. And we're working closely, obviously, with the fire service on that basis. We do have a number of blocks in the city with this type of cladding, and where it is a serious risk, because you can have this sort of material, but it is small because it's in a location that doesn't pose risk. So I think that's probably like needs to be understood. But where it is, a category 1 hazard, where it is a serious risk, then obviously we want it removing. I think one of the issues that we have is that we do have building owners in the main working with the council, and to remove that. I would have liked it to have been removed a little bit quicker, but I do think we've got a little bit of momentum moving on getting the material moved. But we do have, as Paul has said, is a building that, despite all the efforts, we're struggling to be able to find a resolution. So we are taking formal action on that basis, which we will do. And in the past, where there has been some significant issues, I have also authorised officers to issue notices so that building has to have 24/7 security in the building, or it is not safe to be in the building and people need to leave. Fortunately, Sheffield has had very few incidents, and fortunately, most landlords and building owners work really closely with ourselves, the council and the fire service to mitigate. We do also have 1 or 2 buildings where we are checking what materials they have got on them, and we're working closely with the building owners to do that. And I'm not sure if the scrutiny meeting is aware that we've been working closely with government directly on future regulations, and also working to raise the issue of leaseholders in these buildings who are facing some significant bills really, and to see what assistance could be available. And we are providing any advice that we can to anyone who is worrying about losing their home, who lives in one of these buildings. So we are doing that, whilst also making sure that private building owners know that there is still government funding available to help them be able to afford to remove the cladding and get it replaced, and making sure that information is widely available to owners as well. So, but I think the size of Sheffield, we have round about, 100 high-rise buildings, including the council's 24, and, by and large, we've had very few serious issues. And also, we do have a track record of working closely with building owners, lettings agencies and management agencies who I have been very good at putting risk mitigation plans in place. But I think I agree with Paul, some of it's taken a lot longer than we would like, and some it is disappointed that we have had to resort to formal action to be able to, in order to be able to move this on a little bit.
And just to expand slightly on that, when we had the evacuation some 9-10 months ago of the building, we found out that the building inspectorate regime was absolutely inadequate. We made representations to the government, and we got my local MP, who was involved with local government, to make representations. And he received notification last week that the government are now reviewing the building inspectorate regime and are going to alter the external monitoring. What was happening in very simple terms was, if a building was being erected, if they sent a video to a London company, they could authorise the building controls on it, which was absolutely ridiculous. There was no local input or input from council building control at all. We understand there's a white paper being produced on that now, which will alter that legislation, which was spearheaded by Janet and myself approaching the government on it. So there might be some good news for everyone nationally through that as well.
If I might just deal with the issue of the delay in issuing the report, which I think has rightly been brought up because it has taken a long time. I think if I could just try and apologise for it, but also try and explain why it did take some time to get it over the line towards the end. In that Jill did a lot of all the work on preliminary on the report to get all the information that we could get together to get a draft report together. It was about February last year that Jill and Janet came to me and said, we just need to get some external advice to, just finalise this. And unfortunately, that then got into a bit of a legal process because we were trying to do two things. One was get further documentation from Lovell. The second was to try and work out whether we had a legal claim against them or any of their subcontractors. And once you're trying to work out and go to other people to suggest you might have a claim against them, you're in a bit of a legal process there, which I'll use a phrase which is probably not the right one, but it puts them on the defensive a little bit, because what you're saying is we are looking at whether we can take a claim against you, therefore we want you to give us this information. And so naturally they're wary about that, and they got their lawyers involved quite reasonably and understandably. And that just took a process to go through that to get to the position where we got to, where we decided we couldn't take a claim. Now, I think doing that was important for two reasons. One is because the Homes England funding that we had that was used to replace the cladding was contingent upon us not having a claim against any other party. So we needed to do that proper work to be able to satisfy Homes England that we were entitled to retain that money. The second is I've attended one of the meetings with the residents, and understanding whether we could take a claim against the contractor was an important point for them, and they wanted to know that. So it was important to get to that point. So I make no apologies that we went through that process. What I do apologise is that it took so long, because I think with hindsight we could have possibly got to the conclusion of that a little bit quicker. It did actually in the end yield some important documentation from Lovell's that was key to understanding and giving us some of the evidence that we were able to put into the report. So although it did take a long time, it was eventually, I think, a fruitful exercise that we went through. the other thing is we completed that around February, so we were in the process of finalising the report when COVID hit, and that just knocked us all sideways for a number of months while we were just getting up to speed on that before we could then get the report finalised. So again, I apologise, because I think whilst that process was important, I think it did take slightly longer than it should have done. And so I give my apologies, because I was managing that aspect of it. So I again apologise to everybody for the delay. But I think it's important to explain why we ended up in that process, and that it got delayed over that year period.
Thanks, Dave. So I've not had any other comments in the box from councillors that want to ask questions, so I'll jump in with me. So my ward has more council-owned tower blocks than any other in the city, and I just have to again say how great the initial response was from the council after Grenfell. The amount of engagement, the amount of times people in those tower blocks saw the cabinet member at the time, Councillor Dunn, Janet and others, and you did a good job to make sure that their concerns were heard, that they were reassured. And I guess my question then, linked to that sentiment, is what have we learned that can reassure them or improve things for them even more now going forward? So what have we learned about tenant engagement? What have we learned about repair service responses? What have we learned about other ways that tenants would interact with the council as their landlord? The second question is, it's just a follow-up really on what Janet said about private leaseholders getting some rather large bills. So I think all councillors were sent an email in the last week or so from a private leaseholder who was concerned about having a roughly £7,000 bill relating to security costs that they've had to put in place because of cladding issues, etc. And obviously it's not our place to foot that bill or anything like that, because it's a private building and that's between them legally. But what can we do to, whether it's just providing information, etc., about how they could sort of deal with that, given that it's quite a particular situation that they find themselves in, that puts them at risk potentially of losing their property, homelessness and other things that would then have a cost. So whether it's just sharing information or what, but what could we do to help private leaseholders in those situations as well?
Sure.
So on that particular case, Ben, I've been in touch with the gentleman already. We've put him in touch with the local MP's office. In addition to that, we've given him the direct number of an officer in the council who will assist him in dealing with the situation. But it is a difficult situation, because you quite rightly say it all depends, and we haven't seen this yet. It depends what he signed in his original lease when he bought the property, and every one of these leasehold arrangements in various blocks are different. So without seeing the paperwork, it's difficult to tell him or give him too much advice. But we have been in touch with him and directed him where to go with all of that. So what was the other thing you asked me, Ben?
What we've learned.
Yeah, the other was just about lessons to my tenants, really. What can we learn as sort of the service and how engagement will be better and that type of thing?
Well,
yes.
Damn it.
Do you want me to come? Yeah, so I think one of the things, and I think, certainly working with residents on this, and you're right, Ben, when in 2017, we very, very quickly got out with the fire service, with obviously cabinet member at the time, Jane Dunn, and talked to people. We walked the buildings, we talked to people. I think Penny, you were on some of those meetings as well, to reassure people. And I think at that time, it was about reassuring people. We also, even though it didn't meet with the government's blocks that they would test, we also arranged to have them all tested. So we had them all tested and we sent them away to the experts. And what we did is provided that information to each and every resident, and so that they absolutely knew on all of our tower blocks, you know, what was on their building, so they could be reassured. And fortunately, you know, apart from Hanover and the 3 brick ones, as mentioned, Penny at Stannington, that those tests all came back that what was actually fitted on those buildings was what we thought was fitted on buildings, which is aluminium, obviously, cladding, rain screen cladding with that mineral insulation. So that was fortunate. However, I think moving forward, I think we've got, you know, regulations are tightening up. And what we are doing as part of the housing investment plan is we are commencing consultation on sprinklers, on you know, we're placing fire doors, we are looking at the additional fire precaution measures. And I think in terms of the lessons, what we are doing is going to be trying to take our time to be able to do that consultation. It's difficult because we can't meet, and so Jill and her team have been looking at how we can engage with blocks, and you know, whether it's virtual meetings or whether we can do something locally to be able to talk to people and let them feel all the products and actually think of what we are wanting to put in the buildings. One of the things that does work well, which we do regular, is those project group meetings with tenants and residents, you know, a place where people can come and ask officers of questions, check things, take materials away and, you know, have a good feel for them. You know, and that is a model that obviously we will continue to be doing on all capital works, and particularly ones that revolve around obviously fire safety. So we have got a programme of investing in blocks, you know, that, and we, you know, we as soon as possibly we can, you know, we will be getting out and meeting people on a regular basis. But we're also planning that whilst we can't always meet in person, that we find different ways of being able to communicate with people and get them engaged in the Future Works programmes. And I think, you know, engagement is just so important, you know, so that people are having a say. But also across, you know, our high-rise estates, we also, you know, have quite a number of our own leaseholders, and also making sure that they know that what we are going to do is make sure that if there are any recharges, that those are reasonable, and obviously we don't want that to be unaffordable for them. So, you know, so a wide range of payment measures, really. In terms of, as Paul said, you know, in terms of the email that you would all have received, you know, there are things that leaseholders in private blocks can do and should do. They should make sure that they've got all the information and what is actually being charged. There is you know, there is a tribunal that they can go to if they think they've been overcharged. They should be checking to see whether any grant assistance has been given, so exactly how much as the owner has spent. And also, as we were saying, you know, like, you know, come to the council. There are some very odd leases around. Come to the council, you know, and we're happy to help someone, but also point them in the direction of where good quality advice is provided for them.
And just finally to add to that, Ben, I think the other big lesson learned is that we need to look at our major blocks with a different eye to what we've looked at them through the repair and maintenance service. And I think that will be one of the biggest changes of this, that we will bring in this regular inspection routine and some small things that John brought up at the meeting last week that make a big difference, like when an operative goes out because we have a light bulb gone on a walkway or on a stairwell, and there's one on the next stairwell out. At the moment, we've had a system where they just do the job they're sent in for. they need to be able to look and do the two jobs at once. It would save a lot of money to the service. And how we reskill, not retrain, but reskill the operatives who work in these blocks to look for the small jobs that need doing, so they can get done straight away. All part of a restructure around how we look after the maintenance and repair side of the blocks.
Sorry, I put my hand up. There were a couple of things I just wanted to add to what Janet was saying about resident engagement, what we've learnt. So one of the things that we've participated in is a best practice group with Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And so that's been testing out what works in terms of fire safety, what's the best way of communicating with residents about fire safety. So there's a report going to be published shortly around that, which we'll have contributed to. So a lot of that is we have to try different methods. You can't rely on one method. You must try different methods. You must persist with it as well. So don't expect everybody to absorb everything in the letter. A lot of the fire safety stuff, as I think has been recognised earlier on, is quite complicated. So that's one piece of work that will be ongoing. So there's some commitments from us to continue with that. Linked to that, and I think partly because of Grenfell, but other things that have been brought to our attention, we are going to establish a high-rise tenant and leaseholder forum. So there'll be some letters going out inviting people to participate in that. And that will be wide ranging. So I've no doubt that early on, probably fire safety will be a big topic, but it will also look at things like how we manage waste, what we do in terms of tenancy management, because they are different blocks. They need specialist management interventions and support for people to make high-rise living the best we possibly can, because some people that's their only choice. I think the other thing is the government's building safety bill talks about having a resident engagement strategy, and it's going to take a little bit of time to get all the details around what's going to be in this building safety bill, because it's just, I think they've just been through the select committee. Oh, is it finished? Sorry, but my connection just went off then. But what we'll do, we start work on those resident engagement strategies now for every single block. And on Monday, I've got a dedicated fire safety manager is starting in the housing service, and that will be one of his key roles. And I'm hoping one of the first people he's going to meet is John, because I think John's got a lot to share with us, and the guy's called Adam. So I think it would be very useful for John and Adam to meet up, because and share his experience around over the last 15 years in relation to fire safety. So we will have a dedicated resource, and we're fully committed to making sure that we get the right information to customers. They understand what rationale, why we're doing certain things, but also what we need them to do to help us deliver a safe environment for them to live in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've not had any other questions or councillors indicating they want to ask a question. Obviously the report given was designed as a briefing paper, so it didn't carry any recommendations with it, but obviously we are free to make recommendations if we want. Is there anything anybody would like us to put forward?
Chair, can I
just take off your microphone and speak, because I can't see you all.
Sorry, I can. I don't think I can stay long, because evening meetings are quite something when you've got small children. So I'm going to have one last say in this. Obviously, it's not going to be the last, because we're going to be working to make sure that the residents of the Hanover Tower get what they need, and there's been, and also there has been a lot of meetings, and there's been a lot of discussions, and there's been a lot of issues, and one of the things that we need to, in terms of you said earlier what lessons have been learned, we keep on coming back to that. We keep on coming back to communication. And I think when we say communication, we don't mean communication just with the residents. We also need to learn the communication with ourselves, with each other holistically. There's no any other way that we can support this city if we're not communicating effectively. and better, if this is to support officers or to support residents, and officers and residents to support elected members, is to really have that very effective communication. So, for example, if I think, David, you said the report was taken too long, and you apologized many times in saying that. But if that was communicated very effectively to the residents and to the elected members, how long it was taken and why it was taken, we wouldn't be asking these questions. I think there has to be a time, and I think Councillor Baker asked questions about some of the things that are missing, some of the communications that are missing. There has to be a time that we use this as lessons learned, but really change things as well of how we communicate. So for me, one of the main things here is the communication. If we had effectively keeping records or making sure that when contractors and Sheffield Homes went, if we knew what committee actually would have done, with the communications. This is a lesson that we learned in terms of our contracts, going to private contracts and making sure that there's some sort of liability if they lose the communications, because ultimately it stops with those who are dealing with it, whose names are going to be on reports and who are going to be facing residents like John and others. So for me, I'd like to say thank you for bringing this up today to the scrutiny and accepting and agreeing with me that we talk about it. And I'd like to thank John for all you're doing and all your officers as well. I mean, it's not officers against members, it's actually all of us trying to do something for the residents that we have been electing us, but also looking up to us to support them. Thanks, Chair.
No, thank you, Councillor Rivers. Councillor Murphy, you want to suggest an action point?
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. It was something I think was raised earlier on in the discussion, and that is about the time limitations for reports coming back, and if there are delays for whatever reasons that David pointed out to us earlier, that the officers come back to full council and explain in full to us the reasons for the delays, because I think it's quite important that we time limit those types of reports for the residents of the block, but also for local councillors as well. Every year we have newly elected councillors retire and move on, etc., etc. And I think it's really important that that continuity is kept and people are kept up to date. But just a final thing as well, I think it was Khaltoon who mentioned about communication in several different languages as well, that carries on, obviously, and that people are supported and helped to understand exactly what is going on. And that's not just left to a few people, but that is kind of, supported by a larger group of people as well. And finally, just to say thank you to all of the officers and to all of the people who've been involved with the work on this. So it really is appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Is there anything else anybody wants to add in terms of recommendations or action points or anything? No. Okay, no, that's fine. So thank you, Councillor Wood, Janet Sharp, Jill Hurst, and David. I can't see you. You disappeared off my screen there, David, with his funky record label background. Appreciate your input for that session today, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, as well, and all of you for the constructive comments you've all made. It's been good.
Yeah, and a big thank you to you as well, John, for your passionate input. It's always important that we get a human element into these sort of meetings and discussions rather than just, I guess, a corporate council one. So thank you very much for your contribution on behalf of the tenants.
Read what I've said.
No, we appreciate that. Thanks, John. Right, so if we move on to the next item on our agenda then, which is the work programme. Deborah, can I pass over to you for that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chair. Okay, so you have the report in the agenda pack that was sent out. We've got, including the next meeting is on the 10th of December, so including that meeting, we've now got 4 meetings left of this year and this work programme. I've not allocated them all to individual meetings yet. That's something that I'll be doing over the next week or two. And I've noticed that Janet is still with us at the moment, which might be helpful, Janet, if you are able to stay for this discussion.
Yeah,
There are quite a few housing related items on the work programme, not surprisingly. And obviously there's the statutory role in terms of the community safety partnership that this committee needs to fulfil as well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we've got quite a number of items on that work programme, and we've got 4 meetings left. We've already got the fire and safety partnership consultation on the agenda for the next meeting on the 10th. As you've seen over the last couple of meetings, realistically, we don't have much chance of including more than one item, because the items, if you want to go into enough depth on each of them, which obviously as conscientious elected members you do, we are finding that under the new arrangements that realistically more than one item becomes quite difficult. So what you'll see, what I'm getting at is that we've got less meetings than agenda items. So I would be really keen to understand maybe some priorities within that list, or kind of views on that, really. In terms of yourself, Janet, we've got 4 housing related items. So we've got social housing, which is quite a broad subject. We've got homeless and people with recourse to public funds. We've got housing repair service during COVID, and we've also got selective licensing. So I guess it's over to members really if they feel specifically that there are any ultimate priorities within that list, and whether there are some that can maybe drop down further down the list.
There are some, the social housing white paper was released last week. I don't know if that is being identified.
We've literally got social housing, that's it, down as an item.
Or we could do a catch-all, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could have the remaining meetings filled with items from yourself, Janet, but
it's whatever works for
exactly.
Okay, colleagues, is there any of those items you'd like to see the emphasis on, so that when Deborah and I sort of put this together in terms of slotting in the dates, we get the things that you guys want to look at? I'll go Councillor Baker and then Councillor Murphy. And then, yeah.
Chair, my apologies. I've been trying to use chat. It seems to not want me to.
Mine too.
Repair service, Chair, because COVID's impacted quite badly on it. And I think we'd like to know where we are on that, please.
Okay, Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think for me and a lot of my colleagues, homelessness is a real issue at the moment in the city. And for me, that's a priority. I think Janet's suggestion of putting the housing items together is a good one. But I really do think at this time of year as well, homelessness is a big issue. And it's increasing and it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Rivers.
I was going to say homelessness, obviously with different, the COVID-19 action groups we have in different areas, we did talk a lot about how people were housed. Specifically in this area of Broomhill and Sharon Vale, we had the Domino's house. So obviously we had officers who came to speak to us about that. But I think this needs to be brought to the impact it had on services and what services have done across the city, especially with the COVID-19 issues. And I do understand that the number of the envisaged number has kind of grown because obviously of overcrowding, and so it would be good to have an indication of how you have met some of these demands during the COVID-19.
Yeah, we can provide that.
Sorry for making you wait while I finish.
Ben, you're frozen. Chair?
Okay, that's fine. I've not got any other
By
hands
switching your camera off, Ben, it'll help.
Now I'm muted. Okay. Wow, that was fun. Just, Deborah, is that all you need from us on this as a steer, and we can sort of slot that into dates?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, Chair. I'll probably have a chat with Janet separately about how we schedule them, and that's been useful because it helps me in terms of prioritizing the issues that members are most keen on. And with the best will in the world, I could schedule 2 or 3 agenda items for each meeting, but you just wouldn't get through them.
No, we'd be here all night. I think 2 hours-ish for an item sort of gives us enough time to sort of do everything and do the public engagement aspects and everything quite nicely.
I mean, Chair, if it helps, I'm quite happy if you want to schedule an extra scrutiny board between now and Christmas to bring some of these items forward. I think with the COVID emergency, like members have said, it is really important. But the only date I'd ask you to, if you do decide to do that, just please avoid the 17th of December.
Okay, we'll do it on the 25th instead then, Paul.
I'm back in hospital on the 17th, so if you can avoid that date, apart from that, I'll fit in to suit the committee.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Hope it goes well, Paul.
Yeah, all the best.
I do.
All the best.
Speedy recovery. Okay, so thanks everyone. So we'll draw that to a close then. Obviously, our next scheduled meeting's the 10th of December at 5 o'clock. So I'll catch you all then, if not before.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Enjoy the evening, guys. Bye.
Thank you.